Friends, would you please join with me in the spirit of prayer? Gracious and loving God, you have been, you are, and you will always be at the center and core, inviting us to lean and leap into your love. Let now these words of the 10 Commandments enter in afresh and anew, stirring in our midst as a community, reminding us of the ways we are tethered and tied together, the ways that these words can help set us free to be your people in this time and place. Guide now the meditations of our minds and hearts and our very lives every single day this week. Amen. Help me, if you would, please, this morning, complete a common phrase that has often been uttered on playgrounds, and you've probably heard it countless other times before. It goes like this: sticks and stones may break my bones, but say it with me, words will never hurt me. We swim in a sea of words today. We're constantly surrounded by all sorts of words. Now, some of those words enter in one ear and quickly exit out the other, vanishing, barely leaving a trace. I'm thinking here of the words that I say to my children when I tell them to go clean their room or do their homework. But then there are these other words that are sticky and stay with us, sometimes sitting uneasily on our very souls. Those are the kind of words, remember last week when we talked about the rocks, and rocks that weigh us down, rocks that wake us up at 3 o'clock in the morning to chit-chat with us. Have you ever had some words wake you up in the middle of the night and speak to you? These words that we swim in, that are surrounding us all the time. And it's good to remember that our Hebrew brothers and sisters have an important insight that can help us try to make sense of the words around us today. The Hebrew word for words is dabar, D-A-B-A-R. Would you turn to someone sitting next to you and say to that person, neighbor, the pastor loves debars. Now that's a sticky sentence for you. It's going to stay with you all week long. Debars, words that are surrounding us all the time. But our Hebrew ancestors, there's something beneath and behind the word debars. It doesn't only mean words like what we've sang or what we've said or what we've thought or that I'm speaking. Debars also mean things in Hebrew. It refers to the sticks and stones of that catchphrase you just helped me complete a second ago. You see, our Hebrew brothers and sisters, they understand that words have life. Words leave an impression. Words last and linger around us. Words have mass and matter and have substance, right? Words and things, that line can get blurred between the two of those. And so, debar points not only to the truth of words, but also that words are like things. The great Jewish scholar, Abraham Joshua Heschel, he once said that words create worlds. And I don't think Heschel was only referring to Genesis 1, where remember, God speaks, God sings to the watery chaos that was churning, and all creation started to spring forth. I don't only think it's the words God spoke at the beginning. It's also the words that God speaks in Exodus 20. If you look at that very opening phrase of the 10 Commandments, it doesn't say that Moses picked up the 2 tablets and a chisel and started taking notes. The focus is on God speaking. Just as God did in Genesis, and Exodus echoes Genesis, God is trying to speak. God is trying to bring and birth forth a people who knew their connection to each other. As a matter of fact, this word dabar, for word or words, actually points to another truth as well. Our Jewish brothers and sisters, the title, the understanding that they originally had wasn't that this was the 10 Commandments that Fred just read to you. Rather, they called this the 10 sayings, the 10 words, the 10 debars of God. They heard these words of God as invitations into life, speaking into being a whole community. And I think it's important to remember where we're at in this sermon series so far. We're nearing the end of it. There's only 1 week left. God has already heard the cry of the people. God has already rescued Moses, who was set adrift and afloat, worked in the lives of faithful women in Egypt, even in the Pharaoh's own daughter, to rescue Moses and raise him under the nose of Pharaoh. God has already confronted the fear-based policies of Pharaoh. God has already moved in the life of people, saying, as Manny reminds us, let my people go. God gave the divine name to Moses, I am Yahweh. God led them when there was no way through the waters. God fed them with manna. And last week, God drenched them in a rock that gushed, saturated, and soaked a people. God has already been an experience, an event in the life of the people. God has already moved in so many amazing ways, and it is now, 20 chapters into the story, that these words are spoken. Words spoken to try to give life, connection, for people to finally see that our lives are tethered, tangled, and twisted together. When I hear these 10 words of God, the image that comes to mind is that of a triangle. Would you take your fingers and form a triangle with it? I think it's one way that you can help make sense of these 10 words. The first 3 of the 10 words have to do with our connection with God. How are we going to connect with the one who's at the center and core of our life? The fourth one has to do with how we're going to connect with ourselves. And the final 6, well over 1/2, have to do with how we're going to connect with each other. If we look at those first 3, those very first 3, the first words that fall from God's lips remind us to keep God at the center, at the core of our very lives. There could be all these other voices, all these other words, all these other worlds that are being created, inviting us, beckoning us to come and enter in. And God says to the community, remember, keep your relationship with me at the center. And as part of that, we need to be careful about the images. We need to be careful about the words we use when we're talking about God, because they do create worlds. We need to be careful with the worlds we're creating for each other and how we're receiving one another. Those first 3 words invite us in that triangle to keep some balance between ourselves and God. That fourth word about keeping the Sabbath, that space set apart to stop, to rest, to breathe, to simply be, to be unnecessary. Now, you all know me well enough to know that that fourth word is the hardest for me to hear. Sometimes I plug my ears and say, la, la, la. I'm not listening to that fourth word, but it's a word we all need to hear. An invitation for us to stop long enough for that embrace of God to really feel it in our very lives, to tend to that connection, to recenter and focus our thoughts on the one who gives us life and light. And then the final six turn our gaze away from God and away from ourselves toward the holy other, the person who's sitting next to you in the pew, the person who you live next door to, your family, your friends, those you'll encounter in the week before us. To tend to those relationships. The Jewish scholar Martin Buber would say that all real life, the real substance of life, that which has mass and matters the most, all real life is meeting. Now, my friends, sometimes the church takes that way too literally. Martin's referring to those moments when we connect with each other, like over cups of coffee and a piece of cake in Seister Hall. Like here in worship where we can feel and hear our voices blending together. You feel the warmth of the person sitting next to you. Buber was trying to say to us that it is in the meeting of the other that we encounter ourselves, our truest self. That truth is echoed and amplified from our African brothers and sisters. They say that I am because you are. There is no I. Now, there is no I without thee. We find ourselves connected and tethered together. And these 10 words, that over half of them had to do with how you're going to relate to each other, treat each other, love each other, care for each other. It's pointing to the truth of how much we need each other and how much our words to one another create worlds all around us. So if we circle back to that opening sense that you helped me complete, that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You know, one of the reasons why I think my soul is so unsettled, why I just want to turn off the television and not listen to the news anymore, is because the words we're hearing nowadays aren't creating a world I want to live in. The words we are hearing right now don't honor. They don't respect. They don't tend to those connections that tether us. They don't give light and life to the truth that we are interconnected with one another. I am because you are. That's the kind of words we need to be hearing. That's the kind of world that we are invited into. So as we try to hold on to these 10 words, this ancient wisdom God gave to people and still gives to us today, there are 3 truths that I pray will be sticky and will stay with you this week. The first is that as you look at that opening part of the passage that Fred read to us this morning, I want you to notice the first words that spill forth from God's lips are the words that God spoke to Moses in the burning bush. I am. Do you remember that sermon several weeks ago where I am Yahweh might have not been spoken words, it might have been the very breath of God breathed on Moses. And here is that echo again, that the giving of the 10 words maybe initially was God breathing on the people the breath of life. Yahweh. Like the rush of a mighty wind. Like that refreshing breeze. Did you feel it this week? Maybe that's what surrounded and swirled around the people as God spoke those 10 life-giving words. Yahweh, remember, I am the one who led you out of Egypt, out of bondage. I was the one who said to Pharaoh, let my people go. Before God offered these 10 words, God was the experience, God was the event that people could carry with them. Which leads me to the second sticky truth that I pray stays with you this week. I don't hear the 10 Commandments in some booming voice. I don't imagine that God was wagging a divine finger at the people or at us. When I hear the 10 words, I hear them spoken softly, sweetly, as a parent would sing to a child cradled in her arms. Reread the 10 words at some point this week and read them as a lullaby. Read them as God saying, keep me at the center and core of your life. Be careful with the images. Be careful with your words. They create worlds. Be careful with how you treat each other. Be careful with yourself. Take a break. Honor each other. Give each other life. Let the words be ones of grace, peace, and love. And that leads me to the third truth that sticks and stays with me, which is that because I don't hear God in a booming voice, but in a gentle voice, speaking these words of life, it means that the 10 Commandments for me aren't some rule book. God is not some divine referee wearing zebra stripes with a whistle upon the divine lips, ready to throw a yellow flag the second the new iPhone for too long, right? God is the one who speaks and sings, calling me back to who I am, tethered and tied to God and to each of you. So can we take these 10 words with us? And I have an invitation for you. When you came in this morning in your bulletin or you were handed one of these handy-dandy charts, would you take that out, please, and hold it in your hands? All of my left brain brothers and sisters are looking at this saying, he's finally talking my language now. I like charts. On the left side of that chart, you will see that different traditions have different ways of numbering these 10 words, these 10 debars. And that might awaken new insights or ideas for you as you look at those differences. In the middle 2 columns, you have some other debars, words from the great reformer Martin Luther, from Walter Brueggemann, a modern-day scholar. And then you'll notice that the final 2 columns are blank. That's your homework. I want you to take these 10 words and breathe them in afresh and anew. I want to encourage you to maybe rephrase or restate the 10 Commandments. Since 90% of them are done in the negative, maybe try to rephrase them in the positive. Rephrase them, breathe them in a way that can speak to your life now. And then start to fill in that last column, the so what and now what. So what? How are these words still creating a world for us? Now what? How are you? How am I? How are we together going to enter into the world these words are still carving out and creating? Friends, I think if we can enter into these debars, these words that God is still singing and speaking into our lives now, what we will encounter are words of promise, words of love, words of grace, words of justice, words of peace for our lives, for our connections with each other, for our church, and for our world. And those kind of words create worlds that are the best and full of grace for us here and now. Thanks be to God. Amen.